This had been the rainiest spring that anyone could remember. 1848 seemed to have been wetter than any time that she could remember. She'd been born in 1840 and she hadn't had that many springs in her life. But now, this girl who would get lost on her way home was visiting her favourite uncle. He had always come to them, but this time he was asking them, the whole family, to come and visit him in Northumberland. She quite liked the sound of Northumberland. She thought that it sounded as if the whole place would be filled with Vikings. And as she came on the newfangled train, she looked and she couldn't believe it. There was a lot of greenery, but the villages seemed to have in their middles factories and foundries and mines. So where there was once always green, now there were chimneys that were belching out thick black smoke. But this girl, who thought that she would just go for a short walk, had wandered, and as she'd been wandering, she'd been thinking, and she could hear the sound of the river. The river was in full flood, because I've told you already, 1848 was a very, very wet spring. The river looked very clean, but it rushed past, and it was then that as she looked, she thought it would be time for her to go home, because she didn't really know where the river was. She couldn't quite remember where her uncle's house was. It was a good place, a big place, for he was a part owner of the pit. As she looked, she could see that there was a boat that was caught on the fast slurping waves of the river Wansbeck. There was someone at the other side, a sound that she didn't really recognise, but it was of machinery. It seemed like the quiet sound of birds and water and wind blowing through the trees was replaced by the constant thud and crash of machinery. She wasn't used to the sound. Even in the city where she lived, even in the city, it was perhaps the sound of horses and carriages as they would clip, clop, clip upon the cobbled streets. But this was a sound of... It was almost like a sound of thunder, but it wasn't that dark. Now, she wondered if she could find her way back to her uncle's house. She looked. There was a fisherman, but he looked burly and strong, and his hands were hard and heavy. He had that fish hook, and she didn't really like the way that he looked. But it was then that she saw that there was a girl by his side. The girl was about the same age as her, but this girl, and she couldn't believe it, this girl, she was wearing trousers. I'll tell you, she gasped, I have never seen a girl wearing trousers. Oh, you haven't seen a girl wearing trousers? The things that she thought she'd said only inside of her head, she'd spoken out loud by the side of the fast-flowing river. Well, I tell you what, if you had to work in the pit, then you'd wear trousers too. That coal dust gets everywhere. These are just a pair of me dad's old duds, but I tell you what, I like wearing these trousers. That's right, isn't it, Dad? The fisherman, her father, just nodded. He had no time for girls' talk. Oh, and not only that, I've got, and here, this girl dressed in her trousers pulled from out of her pocket a huge hook. I use this to pull at the coal to make sure that they're all the same size. I tell you what though, I wish there was some way we could do it that wasn't by hand, but me and me mother that will work on the screens, we make sure that the coal's all the right size and all of the best grade. I tell you what, I'm very good at it. Everybody's very proud of me. Isn't that right, Dad? And her father still didn't speak. That's... and he just kind of nodded, because to him, he had no time for girls' talk. I have to scrape and pull, and that dust goes everywhere. And it was true, because she could see that the girl's cuff to her shirt was tied round with a piece of string. the bottom of her trousers were tucked into her socks, and on her feet she had pit boots, which obviously weren't her size. "Oh, you're looking at them, are you? Well, not only do I have to wear trousers, I have to wear pit boots. Those great lumps of coal, I tell you, when they fall on you, they'd knock a toe off or two." Just as the girl was speaking, a bird fluttered in one of the trees. The girl looked up. "Oh aye, there's plenty of birds round here. Mind, it's hard to tell. They all look a bit like crows and rooks. They get covered in the smoke and the dust. Anyway, I tell you what, I haven't got time to be wasting here. By the looks of you," there was a jokey look in her eye, "by the looks of you, you're not short of a bob or two. I tell you what, if you know any of those men who own this pit, tell them they could give just a little bit more wages, especially to the likes of some of the hard-working children like me." It saddened the rich girl to think that only by the fact that her father had money, her uncle had money, that she would have been working by the side of this girl, pulling and scraping and pulling and plying the coal to make sure it was the same size, having to wear trousers and pit boots, and being as black as the coal that was pulled out of the ground. She could hear her father, her mother and her uncle all shouting for her. "That's right, you get yourself back. And remember, have a bit of a word with some of them toffs who live up at the top of the hill. It's not an awful lot of pay for an awful lot of hard work. Isn't that right, Dad?" This time the pitman spoke, for he'd been listening to his daughter. "You're right there. You're right there. It is a lot of work. It is a lot of work for not much pay. I think you should have a word with them." The rich girl had been shocked. The rich girl was surprised, not just by the trousers and the pit boots, but by how little money they got. When she grew older, she decided that she would use all of her influence with all of her family to make sure that the children didn't have to work so long and so hard or for so little. Perhaps it was a good thing that she got lost on her way to home. Perhaps it was a good thing that she travelled up to try and find out where her uncle lived. Because with that meeting, she made sure that not everyone stayed poor while the rich got richer. She used that meeting by the side of the Wansbeck for all the good that she could.